afternoon, everyone. And hi, Jennifer. How are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you, Bassam?
I'm doing great. I'm very excited that you are here. And I don't know why I'm being like a bit more performative than usual, but maybe because I had too much coffee.
I'm excited to be here with you.
I
It's
am
all
excited
good.
to be here, and I really shouldn't have had this last cup of coffee. So I'll just like try to, tone it down. We are very much looking forward to this conversation. We have with us Professor Jennifer Victor, whom I'll introduce in just a minute, who has been doing wonderful work all around. We are here to talk about just a couple of things out of this series of productive things you've been doing, including the Democracy Lab, as well as a bit about your research. And
Great.
before we get into it, I'd like to introduce you, if you don't mind. I'm happy to say that Jennifer Victor is an associate professor of political science at George Mason University's Schar School of Policy and Government. She studies the U.S. Congress, legislative organization and behavior, social network methods, political parties, campaign finance, organized interest groups, and lobbying. She is the co-editor of the Oxford Handbook of Political Networks, and Victor is co-author with Niles
Ringa.
Niels Ringa of Bridging the Information Gap, legislative member organizations in the United States and the European Union. And she has published research in the American Journal of Political Science, the British Journal of Political Science, American Political Science, American Politics Research, Party Politics, Interest Groups and Advocacy, PS, Political Science and Politics, and elsewhere. In 2019 is like so ancient now. In 2019, she was awarded George Mason's University Teaching Excellence Award, which I do remember. Congratulations, belated. Victor is co-founding contributor to the political science blog Mischiefs of Faction, and is a contributing writer for Gen by Medium, GEN. Her public scholarship has also appeared in the New York Times, The Conversation, the OUP blog, and Oxford University, I'm assuming, and LSE US Politics blog. She serves on the board of directors of the nonprofit Nonpartisan Center for Responsive Politics, is the past president of the National Capital Area Political Science Association, and past chair of the APSA organized section on political networks. I will let people read the rest of your bio on their own because we need to get to the conversation, but that's a lot. I don't know how you do it. I am very happy that you have time to come and join me here to address the Democracy Lab and maybe talk a little bit about your research towards the end. Now, we all know, or many of us do know, that the Democracy Lab has been extremely successful. I've seen events all over campus. I've been at events where I've seen the students. They're extremely impressive. And it just seems that it's one of those projects that's quite successful. Can you tell us about it before I have my own questions, but I'd love to hear from you about the Democracy Lab, and we'll take it from there.
Great. So this is we are now in the third year of Democracy Lab. So Democracy Lab is a residential learning community. It is one of, I don't know, maybe 30 or 40 residential learning communities at George Mason University. Up until this point, it's the only residential learning community in the Schar School. The Schar School has a few other learning communities that are non-residential, meaning students can join it without needing to be residents on campus. But the Democracy Lab is specifically designed to create community among first-year students. So these are freshmen, first coming to college, living on campus. They all live in the same dormitory. They're all a major in one of the Schar majors. Most of them are government and international politics, but they could be in public administration or international security and law. And they live in the same building. We get anywhere from 60 to 80 students involved in this effort. And I provide the academic programming for them. So there is a whole housing and residence world at George Mason University that I've learned about in the last few years coming into this directorship. I knew nothing about how housing and residence life worked prior to this time, but I have learned that There's a whole sophisticated infrastructure to helping students to thrive on campus and connecting them to resources and helping them to build communities with one another. But before this sort of themed housing kind of situation with the learning communities came up, they were kind of struggling to develop community on campus. This is something that I think Mason as an institution has struggled with for a number of years. So Democracy Lab is the Schar School's version of how to create community among these first-year students, and it's a blast. So the students who self-select into this tend to be eager beaver, go get them. I'm here for all the politics things. They come at politics from lots of different angles. Like it's a fairly diverse group in a number of ways, but they're ready to have some fun with not just on the academic side, but they tend to be politics nerds and wonky, which that means they're my people. So I appreciate them. So the types of things that we have done and continue to do with Democracy Lab have essentially transformed this learning community into sort of a flagship kind of premier model of learning communities at Mason. So we're starting to see other learning communities that are run by other units on campus looking to model some of what we've done with Democracy Lab because we're getting such amazing engagement with our students. So the types of things that we are doing is there's always a either semester or year-long academic project. This is where the lab part of Democracy Lab really comes through, where I'm trying to lean into the applied social science or the trying to make very practical applications of what they might be getting exposed to in the classroom to help them get a better sense of what it's like to be a social scientist. And so I can talk more about some of the specific projects that we've done there. In addition to that, we do a biweekly series that's every other week, not twice a week, that I call Hidden Curriculum. So Hidden Curriculum is a series where we talk about topics that help students to excel at college or get the most out of their college experience. Something like between a third and a half of Mason undergraduates are first-generation college students. So to help them really get the most out of their years in college, there are often little things that they may not know about how college works. And I try to expose them to as much of that as possible, whether it's tips about getting internships or applying for jobs or getting into grad school or just how the world of academia works, what different kinds of professors are, how to study, how to manage your time, all of these different kinds of challenges that students face. So we use some guest speakers and some students, and it's a very casual kind of thing. One of the things that we've done, particularly these last couple of years with DemLab, is I bring as much of the programming as possible to the students. So I believe in a meet them where they are kind of philosophy. So we bring the programming into the dormitory or into the residential spaces where the students are living and hanging out rather than. So this is outside of the classroom. I'm coming to them in their housing space and developing relationships with them, helping them to feel like, I'm a person that they can talk to. One of the goals of DemLab is to help students develop relationships with faculty. And so I'm that first face of faculty that many of them are getting that kind of interaction with. So that's one of the things we're doing. We do a bunch of field trips as well. Students tend to really like those. Those are more in the spring semester. But we go to the Capitol. We go to the White House. We've done the United States Institute of Peace. We had a terrific trip to the National Archives up in the legislative vaults, which I always think is really special this past year. Picture. Yeah, that's from our Capitol Hill field trip last year. So we had, 40 or 50 students go on that trip. That's awesome. They got the tour of the Capitol. I encouraged a bunch of them to make meetings in the offices. So they got experience going into the members' offices of senators and representatives and sit down with a staffer or whoever and ask some questions and take some photos and run around Capitol Hill and get to know the whole place, which I think is super exciting.
That's really wonderful. Now, can you tell us a little bit about how such learning communities come about and how they can become quote unquote a lab? The word lab has been, quite popular in the past few years. I mean, we hear it quite a bit. I don't know where and how this came to be, but it does make sense. But how does it actually happen? If someone wants to create something of the sort, or how did the Democracy Lab happen?
So I'm the second director of the Democracy Lab. The first director was Peter Mandeville. And so I don't really have the origin story here. Back when in like 2015, 2016, something like that, when housing and residence life was first starting at Mason, first starting to develop learning communities, they came to us and said, wouldn't Shar like to have a learning community? And I asked a lot of questions, and it became very clear.
You asked a lot of questions. I'm
I
really,
did.
I'm really surprised. I'm shocked.
Well, it became really clear very fast that housing and residence life wanted us to start a learning community, but it was all on us to provide all the resources, like the labor, and like it's a lot of work to run a learning community and to do it well. And I didn't have any of those resources. So I was like, thank you very much. I don't think so. And then we, over the course of years and different leadership and new people come in with new priorities in different parts of the university and in the Shar School. And eventually we got some leadership who were like, I think learning communities could be really a great thing for our undergraduate population. And the school basically poured resources into it. They made it compensated faculty for the time that they spent developing learning communities. They hired staff whose main job is to provide administrative support for learning communities. And these aren't just like, these are administrative staff who have professional educational backgrounds in higher education. So these are like highly qualified, highly trained staff. And those resources make all the difference. Like, why is the Shar School's Learning Community Democracy Lab sort of thriving where some other learning communities aren't quite as robust or as active? It's all about the resources. It's all about the energy and the time and all the effort that's going into them. So that's just where Shar has been placing its resources, and it's really paid off. Our students they say a lot of really great things about what they get out of DemLab. So, for example, just last week, I was actually on Capitol Hill my daughter is a senior in high school, so she's taking AP Government this year. And I signed up to be a chaperone for the class field trip because they were going to Capitol Hill. I was like, I know Capitol Hill. I'll sign up for that. So I hadn't chaperoned a kid field trip since she was in first grade. So, it's been a minute. So anyway, I go with this group of high school kids to Capitol Hill, and I had made them an appointment in Representative Jerry Connolly's office because that's what you do when you go to Capitol Hill, and you go with me. And because he's our representative in our area. And I walk into the office for our meeting, and there's a woman sitting at the desk in the next room who leans over and goes, Professor Victor, what are you doing here? So it's a Mason student who is a sophomore who was in DemLab last year, and she's an intern on Capitol Hill in Connolly's office this year. And it was just delightful. And she's just terrific. And the staff there had really nice things to say about how talented she is. Her name is Kaylee Fernandez. And we exchanged some emails afterwards. And she was saying how critical her experience in the Democracy Lab was for sparking her interest in what it might mean to work in government or to go into public service or different kinds of fields of careers that you can do in politics, and that she wouldn't be having this very successful internship on Capitol Hill this semester if it weren't for her DemLab experience last year. So that was just very gratifying kind of story from a student.
Of course. I mean, that's why we do this.
It's why we do
all of this. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you had asked about the lab thing.
Yeah.
So for me, the lab means science. It means teaching the students, giving them some hands-on experience of how we study questions of society and politics and government using social scientific methods. So even though my research tend to focus more on institutions, in Virginia, every year is an election year because we do our local elections, our state elections in the off-cycle years. So whether it's a congressional or presidential, governor, state house, whatever, there's always an election every year in Virginia. And so that's something to take advantage of from a student scholarly campus point of view. And so for the last couple of years, we've been running studies using the Democracy Lab students kind of as like research assistants or lab assistants. So I'm developing studies with questions about voter behavior, and the DemLab students are helping me to execute the research designs. And then we're looking at the data together, and I'm showing them the skills about how you analyze the data. So for the last couple of years, we've been looking at barriers to voting behavior among young people. So it's very well known that people under the age of 25 vote with much less frequency than older people. And it's often assumed that, young people don't vote because they are apathetic or they're not so clued into things, or they just don't pay attention, or they don't care, or whatever. And I really want to know if that's in fact the case. Is that why, particularly college students, what are the barriers to college students who vote, and what kinds of things, bless you,
Sorry.
can we do to help stimulate young people, particularly college students, to engage in voting? So we've been designing randomized controlled studies among students at George Mason University to try to determine the best mechanisms to get students to turn out to vote. The study that we did last year involved canvassing students and emailing them. And so we get people enrolled in the study, and we randomly assigned them to different treatment groups, whether they met with a peer canvasser or received emails or were in a control group. And we basically got null results on that finding. It was a big election year, congressional election year, midterm. And there wasn't anything interesting on the ballot in our area. Like Jerry Connolly was literally the only thing on the ballot, and he was going to win. So it wasn't competitive. And turnout was just super low. And so we didn't get any variance on the stuff that we were looking at. This year's study that we're doing is a little bit different. We've got, so in 2023, the elections in Virginia were state elections, and there was a lot of things on the ballot. And it was what we call a low salience election. That means most people don't pay much attention to local and state politics. And so people may not have known very much about what was going on. And so, again, we recruited students into the study and then randomized them to different types of stimuli in how we encouraged them to vote or register to vote or help them register, answer their questions. And we don't have the results yet of this study. We hope to have the findings soon, but we just recently received information from the Department of Elections that we will need to complete the statistical analysis. But essentially, we're using these studies not just to answer important questions about voter behavior among young people, but to give the Democracy Lab students a very hands-on, very applied, get your fingers dirty with what real social science is kind of experience from the very get-go. A lot of students come into Mason who are interested in doing research or working closely with faculty. And, it's not until their maybe sophomore, junior, senior year where they wind up doing that stuff. And in the Dem Lab's case, we're getting these students directly involved with relevant applied research from the very first minute that they are on campus with these studies. And so we're teaching them the principles and the ethics and the skills that they need to understand what social science is all about.
That's awesome. Let me ask you a little bit about the actual experience of college students and how this helps them. But before, I need to say something that is kind of like a point of order. I'm really impressed, Jennifer, with how I forgot. I'm not impressed with how I forgot something, but it's coming. This is the next sentence. Bad sentence construction. I hope students are not watching this. Actually, I hope they are watching this.
Finish your thought, man.
Basically, I forgot to tell you that if I am, fixing some things production-wise, and I'm not looking at you, I'm looking away and so on, like ignore me, just keep looking at me as if I'm actually looking at you. And you did it without me saying it. And I realized I forgot and I couldn't stop the interview. And we're going to keep this in the interview, by the way. We're not taking this
I've done a lot of media interviews.
I know, but it's like I forgot to tell you. And I felt like I'm being rude. But I figured that, oh my God, she figured it out. Okay, so that's excellent.
We're all good.
That's excellent, yeah.
We're all good.
So can you tell us a little bit about the way that Democracy Lab helps students in their own major in college, how it actually enhances their performance potentially, and also, ultimately, and I know that some of these students are not graduating right now, but so they have some time for the graduate. How does it prepare them for the job market?
Yeah. So I think there's two main things that students are getting out of this that is helping them down the line, either during their time at Mason or upon graduation. One is, I think it's hard for students to appreciate when they enroll in college and they show up on campus just how many resources there are at a university that are all there, that are designed to help students thrive in this educational environment. They've come from high school, and most of them, you come from a high school where you're just sheep in a bin and, you just get moved around and told what to do and have to follow all these rules. And you come to college and there's all this freedom. And you're told at orientation about all these different services and so forth on campus and all these different opportunities. But I think it's overwhelming and it's really hard for people to process. And there's some assumption that, oh, well, I'll get to that, or, oh, well, that's not relevant for me, or I'm never going to need to know that, so I'm going to tune this whole section out right now. But when DemLab students come to campus, one of the things I impress upon them, after we have a whole introductory discussion about what is democracy and how we're going to study and engage with democratic principles, I tell them that George Mason University is basically the People's Socialist Republic of George Mason University, because there are so many services, whether it's health services or tutoring services or various types of, maybe you're housing insecure or food insecure. Maybe you've got special needs or educational disadvantages, or you've got special interest in particular type of topics, whether it's political or social or community or whatever. There are zillions and zillions, okay, that's an exaggerated number, of offices and services and professionals on campus who are there to help students achieve their goals and to thrive and expand themselves and learn how to get the most out of college. And I think, honestly, students need a guide. They need guides to help them connect to those services and to help them feel like that they are getting what they are paying for, basically, with their big tuition, right? So between the study abroad office and the internships and all the different specialized offices across campus to help students deal with whether it's challenges or opportunities or whatever it is, having a sort of personalized director that can help you not only understand what those are, but then connect you to people across campus is really important. In reality, we've had academic advisors and other kinds of advisors that have done that kind of service for students for years. But I think, and this gets me to the second thing that I think students are getting out of it, it's hard to really internalize that and really act on that information unless you feel like it's all integrated, unless you feel really connected to it in a way that makes it easier for you to reach out and take advantage of that stuff. So the second main thing that DemLab is doing for students is it's building community. And I don't mean that in some squishy, fluffy kind of kumbaya, we need community way. I mean this in a really serious way. Creating and maintaining communities is the fabric of democracy. Democracy, governments, the social world, society, living in a human society does not work unless we understand how to live together collectively and to support one another in communities. And it's really hard to do that in college. You move to college, you're all 18-year-old and awkward, and there's all these social demands and new academic demands, and it's hard. And DemLab is an immediate community of people who share some interests and maybe share some common challenges or common goals or whatever it is, that we provide that glue that allows this group of students to really connect with one another, that gives them the support that they need and maybe the courage that they need to start taking risks and applying for jobs and internships and the various opportunities that we can throw their way. And I think it makes a difference, the student I saw in Capitol Hill last week. She would not have had that internship if she hadn't been exposed to all of this other, tutorials and skill building workshops and resume writing workshops and how to get a job and how to transformation, all that kind of stuff that we exposed them to last year. And she put it all to practice and got her great opportunity. And it's transformational for her in her young professional life.
Awesome. And then, of course, I'm assuming that we share these success stories on our websites, or do we not?
We certainly try to.
Okay.
I think,
it gets people excited.
It does get people excited. And I think our media, recruiting, whatever people, professionals that we have, particularly in the Schar School, are always looking for these stories. Like, who are the shiny students, the bright objects that are doing cool things or taking challenge risks or whatever, and doing exciting stuff out there in the world. And they really do rely on faculty to try to point those students out to them so that they can highlight them.
Especially how we actually show the trajectory from, doing XYZ and how this XYZ has been able to, produce better chances in the job market and so on.
Yep.
I want to ask you a question about I know that you work on networks, and I actually remember the second encounter that we had about 300 or 400 years ago. I connected with you on the question of networks as I work on networks, on economic networks, actually, in the realm of political economy. How do we know networks among members of Congress are important for understanding why Congress does what it does? If you can tell us about this and kind of relate it to what we're doing, because one of the things that I know from my own background, I graduated from Georgetown University, and you study network theory, and then you realize, oh my God, this is how I'm living. Like, this is why I'm connected to these people. This is why a lot of the projects that I'm working on involve certain, people who are, part of the networks. I'm not saying everybody, but there's something about network theory that is crucial over and above, other sorts of dimensions, even class or, background. So there's something about, that connection, these nodes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I got into this I don't know if it's an unusual way, but before I was even faculty at Mason, I got my first faculty job at the University of Pittsburgh circa 2003 or so. And after my first year there, I went and did a fellowship through the American Political Science Association on Capitol Hill, where they take a half a dozen Congress scholars every year, put them on the Hill to not collect data or do interviews, but to act as a staffer, to develop intuitions and see how the place really operates. And it was a terrific experience. I loved being a fellow on Capitol Hill. But I had all of this, decades worth of training through college and grad school of learning to study politics from a very particular analytical point of view of people who engage in the political behaviors that they do because of the institutional constraints around them. And we think of people as maximizing their utility. And it's all this very kind of economic individualism understanding of why people do what they do. And I got to Capitol Hill in the fellowship, and I kept seeing things that didn't fit the model. I kept observing things like, oh, it seems like Senator Conrad and Senator Santorum are co-sponsoring this bill together because their two chiefs of staff used to work together on K Street on this particular topic, or they're friends with each other. There were all of these interactions that were social interactions between members and staffers and lobbyists and so forth that seemed to have a real impact on outcomes that we care about as scholars, like how people sponsor bills and why they vote the way that they do and represent constituents and so forth. And I didn't really know what to do with this. I was like, I don't know how to account for social relationships in my understanding of how senators and members are voting on the floor. And I just sort of walked away from the fellowship befuddled. I was like, that was interesting, but nothing that I saw there fits what I learned in the textbooks. And I just sat with it for a long time. And then a few years later, I got invited to got an advertisement to attend a conference at Harvard that was the first political networks conference in 2008. And I read the blurb about what the conference was about, and I went, that's what this is. That's what I need to know in order to understand politics. And I go to the conference and I attend the workshops. I drank all the Kool-Aid that there was. And it really was
the actual Kool-Aid.
No, it wasn't actual Kool-Aid. It was intellectual brainwashing Kool-Aid. But in the best way. It was exposure to ideas that were new enough in political science that I didn't get training on it in grad school, but I knew it was the tools and the theories that I needed in order to answer the questions that I came up with when I was on that fellowship. And so I dove into the field, and it had an absolutely transformational effect on my research agenda at that point. And so then from then on, I have been taking this lens of understanding politics as being about relationships and applying it to questions. And to me, it's very intuitive. If you go and talk to a lobbyist or a member of Congress or somebody or a journalist who covers politics, you can't hardly have any conversation with somebody who actually is a practitioner of politics without them bringing up something about relationships, about who they know and what they know and how their access changes based on who's in power and how their relationships work and so forth. And yet, that very basic intuition about how politics works was not really present in the literature about Congress and voting behavior and so forth. So over the course of just in the last 15 years or so, the intuition about the importance of relationships for understanding political outcomes has really been started to be taken seriously by scholars. Not related to Congress, but one of the best examples of this, I think, is in the voting behavior literature, where for decades, the political science understanding about why individuals vote was this very lame equation. If the costs exceed the benefits of voting for any individual, then they won't vote. But lots of people do vote, and we think they do it because it gives them the warm and fuzzies inside. There's like this D term that we added to the equation. And it was just, I always found it a very dissatisfying kind of answer to the question about why people vote. And it turns out, as the research has developed, that you cannot understand the question about why people vote as an individual question. People vote in social context. They vote, whether or not they vote and how they vote has everything to do with who they are friends with and who they interact with and who they work with and what media they get exposed to. And it is a socially contrived kind of decision. And so if we apply models to the individual decision to vote, and we're only looking at characteristics of individuals, and we're not taking into account all of this social context, we're going to get it wrong. And that's where we are now, I think, with the study of politics. So the work that I'm doing these days is looking at members of Congress specifically and the ways that members of Congress are connected to one another in formal and informal ways. In a perfect world, I would have access to members of Congress, who do they text message with? Who are they in group chats with? Or, who do they hang out with in their off hours or whatever? Of course, this is all private information that we don't have access to. We can only observe what we can observe. But there is a fair amount of stuff that we can understand about how members of Congress are connected to one another and use that to inform what we understand about why Congress does what it does. So, for example, take last week, the House of Representatives voted on this TikTok bill that's been in the news a lot lately. Yep. So the TikTok bill is essentially American politicians worried about Chinese security and China. So I guess the company that owns TikTok is, what's the relationship? I'm going to get this wrong, but there's a relationship between the owners of TikTok and the Chinese government. And American politicians are worried. You want to fill in the blank for me there?
No, I mean, I was just going to say I'm shocked because it's connected to Chinese government. But then I realized that for all the pretense that we have things that are private in this country, they're still connected, but not in formal ways to power.
Right. No, that's true.
Like media, for instance.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. So the bill that passed was essentially would require TikTok to divest from its relationship with the government of China and be owned by something that's not connected to an adversary of the United States government.
They just don't know how to do it right.
Yeah, I know. The whole thing is there's a lot of posturing, and it's an election year. And so stepping away from the merits of that particular legislation for a moment, because I'm not a policy expert in the foreign politics side of this.
It did piss off my daughter. Beep. Sorry,
did it?
That's the beep. We shouldn't use bad language. Yeah, and then I had to explain to her, she's like, why? So I had to explain politics, and I'm like, oh my god, that's too early.
I know, it's tough.
She's just turned 10.
Okay, but if you look at the vote on the bill on the House floor, It was, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but 300 out of 435 members of Congress, 300 some odd of them voted in favor of this bill. So most of them voted in favor. Who were the people that voted against the bill? You had extremists on the right who are posturing, what was their argument? It had something to do with that the bill wasn't going far enough, basically, because they want to be more isolationist and harsher on China, and somehow the bill doesn't go farther enough for them. And the other people who voted against the bill are the far left progressives, who had a whole different complaint about how the bill was inappropriate. And I'm not substantively don't remember exactly what the arguments are, but what I'm interested in is how that coalition breaks down. Because look, if we apply a straight up like linear model of why does Congress do what it does, why do people vote the way that they do on the House floor, you would say, even if you know almost nothing about American politics, Republicans will vote with Republicans, Democrats will vote with Democrats, and party ID explains most of what goes on. Why do you need to know anything else? Well, you look at the TikTok vote and you can see that doesn't tell you anything, because there was a bipartisan coalition that voted in favor of it. And the people who voted against it came from the extremes of both parties. You had extreme Republicans and extreme Democrats who were voting against it. So the coalitions were weird in a way that a linear model would not help you understand. Right. So, and I haven't tried to model that particular vote using a network method, but I would be willing to put money on the table to suggest that if we really wanted to understand why those coalitions for and against that bill came out the way that they did, is because it has something to do with the networks of relationships, formal, informal, observed, unobserved, whatever, among members of Congress and their constituents who are interested in this particular policy area. And if we had the magic 8-ball that showed us all the latent networks in the world that we can't observe, we could easily understand how this sort of odd bedfellows kind of coalition came together to both support and oppose the bill. So in my mind, it's a way of understanding that we can get a clearer picture of what goes on in politics, legislative, voting, and otherwise, when we take into account a more comprehensive, contextualized understanding of human behavior.
I wanted to ask, while you were saying what you said about the far right voting against it, this is just out of ignorance. If you are in a position where you think the bill did not go far enough, why would you vote against it, not abstain? Or is this the right thing to do? I'm just wondering.
Yeah, so this is where the vote is a public record. And so what the other thing that you have going on is political posturing, right? It's a signal that it's a statement that they are trying to send to whatever constituent groups they're trying to appeal to at the time.
Well,
right?
That brings me to the last question on Congress, which sometimes seems ineffective or hopeless, given that people in Congress are caught up in politics, and more so that than actually solving problems. How does your work on networks or your research in general help us understand this phenomenon? And one last thing, is it constant throughout the previous decades, or have there been changes in that regard?
So I think the way to think about it is relationships and networks have always mattered in politics. But it's only been within the last 15, 20 years that scholars have been using the appropriate tools, lenses, theories, and methods to try to understand the complexities, like politics and why people do what they do and how we get the outcomes that we do. Super complex. There's a lot of things happening all at once. And when we apply very simplistic models, we can learn some things, but we also miss a lot. So by applying a network or relational lens to these things, we get a fuller understanding of why people do what they do. So for example, one of the things that one of the theories that I'm trying to advance, or the frameworks that I'm using in my work right now, is a concept called emergence. So emergence is a concept that is found in lots of different scientific fields. You can find it in physics and zoology and botany and it's sociology. Like, it's in all of these different fields. But the idea of emergence is when you have individual things that come together to make a collective, and the sum of those individual things creates something that is more than just the sum of their parts. Like the whole is worth more than the sum of the parts. So you might think, for example, of like a flock of birds, where you've got a flock of birds that they're all individual birds, and they appear, if they're swarming, they appear to move as one. And how are they doing that without some kind of like communication? And it turns out that they are following just a couple of simple behavioral rules. Birds aren't that bright, so it's not overly sophisticated. But if they are following the two rules of constantly moving forward and being about the same distance from their flying partners, then they can create this cohesive that seems like one thing. And whether you're talking about a flock of birds or a school of fish or something like that, when they move cohesively as a unit like that, they get an emergent property from being a flock or a school, because it helps them to avoid predators, and it has all sorts of like evolutionary biological advantages to have this collective benefit of cooperation, essentially. And politics is essentially the same way. We have this tendency to study politics from the individual level of analysis, but to appreciate the things, like the magical things that emerge from humans when we work collectively together, we can better understand why deals get brokered or conflicts occur or people get more powerful or more trustworthy or whatever. I think of the various types of cooperation, trust, influence, sort of soft power types of things. I think of all of these as emergent properties of political networks that we can appreciate only when we have sort of a whole network picture of how people are related to one another in a political setting.
Would emergence be something to explain like a dependent variable, or?
So it could be. I tend to think of, well, it could be dependent or independent. So to me, like one of the things I'm interested
both
in,
at the same time, maybe?
or both at the same time, sure, because of course it has to be complicated. One of the things I'm interested in is trust and cooperation. And so in networks, we often say that units or nodes that occur in triads tend to be more cooperative or more trusting when they are equally balanced of patterns of three. And so if we look at a congressional network, let's say, of committees or caucuses or co-sponsors of bills or whatever, then we can anticipate how much trust or cooperation we think we should observe in that type of network and compare that against how much triangulation we actually observe. So we can do a kind of a hypothesis test of sorts against an expectation. But then eventually we can like take measurements, like we can observe and measure and quantify statistically these types of units and use that to help us explain other types of dependent variables about why a bill passed or why people voted the way that they did, or things of that nature.
That's pretty cool.
I think it's fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can make pretty pictures with it.
How?
Because networks are amazing to look at.
Okay.
Because they're beautiful.
Well,
and artistic. And I'm not an artistic person, but I can appreciate them.
Yeah, I'm gonna pick your brain about this, but not now, because that will take us off on a serious tangent on the both the question of emergence and the question of trust, because this is what I actually wrote my dissertation on: trust, networks, and of course other variables, other political economic variables. But this was part of my own research, and it kind of was interesting because there was tension between that and then the concept of political economy and the question of wealth, the concentration of wealth, class power, and so on. And some people were upset because it seemed like I was diluting the political economy approach, like a critical political economy approach,
Right.
where class is really important. But then I saw it as, I didn't see them as mutually exclusive. I saw it as an additional layer that helps us understand
Yes.
outcomes that might at first sight appear confusing, but they're not. So that's something that that's very interesting. So I'm glad you brought it up. Well, there's there's a lot I'd like to talk with you about, but I promised you not to go over like a certain amount of time. So my last question to you. Well, first of all, before my last question, let me put on a picture here, and ask you to tell us about it. Let me see right here. Yeah, this is it. So this is the first class that graduated from the website.
Okay, so this is a select group of students. So those are not just DemLab students. Those are DemLab plus some other learning community students. Yeah. So what happened was in fall of 2023, the White House was getting ready to have a state visit from the Prime Minister of Australia. And they called up Mason and a few other local universities and basically said, we'd love to have some young people at the official welcoming ceremony for the state visit for the Prime Minister. No, and the university press office or whatever called up the Schar School and say, hey, do you have some students who would like to go to the White House for this event? And so because we have the learning communities, we have built in groups of students who have sort of already bought into the idea that we get to do special things and we're up for going into town for cool events and whatever. And so it was not that hard for us to assemble a terrific group of students who were all excited. We had to have a lottery actually because there were more students who wanted to go than we had tickets available. And this was the group of students that went to the White House. And there were thousands of people who were there for this welcoming ceremony. So it was a little bit chaotic. But once you figure it out, you're on the south lawn of the White House, which you don't get to go to unless you have some special invitation and Secret Service clearance and whatever. And so our students all go through the security and they find their spot on the lawn and they watch President Biden come out with the Prime Minister of Australia and they give speeches. And there was also like a military parade. Like there's a lot of ceremonial stuff involved with these state visits. And so we got to see all of that. It was a really neat experience. One of the students that went in the group is dual citizen, and she's a dual citizen, U.S. and Australia. And so for her, I think it was particularly meaningful that she got to attend.
No, that's great. And do these students who actually are in one learning community connect with? Is there a mechanism where they connect with other learning communities to like sort of cross fertilize?
Sometimes. So sometimes we'll have events that are sort of marketed to more than one learning community. Recently, there was an event where there was a guest speaker that was going to go talk to the International Relations Task Force, and we advertised it to the DemLab students. So a dozen or so of our students showed up at that event, got a little flavor, a little taste of what it's like to be in the IRTF.
That's
so
cool.
There's some cross-pollinization. The other learning communities...
Did I say cross-fertilization?
I think I said... No, I don't think so.
I said it.
Did you?
Is that okay to say, fertilization? Is that not
pollinization? Nice? I think it's fine.
I mean, what you said makes sense. I wonder if I said cross-fertile.
I think they're synonyms, but I'm also not a botanist.
But is it an insult at all?
I don't think so.
Am I gonna get canceled?
No, I think you're good, man.
All right.
Relax. What was I going to say? Oh, I was going to say, speaking of like emergent properties, there is some magic that happens when you get the freshman learning community in the same space with the other learning communities, which tend to have upper level students, because they teach each other things like good and bad, and it goes both ways. Yeah. But there are benefits to be had by getting students who are, again, bought in already, sort of self-selected into this kind of academic-esque community type thing that has a social element to it. And they share resources with each other and contacts and ideas, and it's great.
That's wonderful. And you're running the Democracy Lab for some time going forward?
Well, we'll take it on a year-by-year basis.
I see. Okay, that's great. I mean, as you know, I was involved in one event recently, which was really successful and very impressive in terms of who the people were there and the questions that they came up with, sort of informally afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very happy that this is happening, and I think that those kinds of things outside the basic classic curriculum and advising and so on are some of the best things one can get out of the college experience.
I agree.
So that's really, really encouraging.
Well, and it's nice that because we have like full-time tenured research active faculty members who are running these learning communities, they're they're serious. Like there's a lot of fun that goes on. There's a lot of like silly content that happens.
Absolutely, that should
But
happen.
there's real academic content. Like I'm teaching them how to program in R and create graphs from the data if that were from the election study and so forth. Like there's real serious skills that students are learning in this non-traditional kind of environment that I think is really great.
And your own background, your own research that you just shared is right up the alley of Democracy Lab, which is
Absolutely.
Like if I were to, work with this program, like it's, my research is on something very different. So, it's wonderful to have you be the person. That's why I was asking, are you going to be a permanent number? Like
I think
like
you should. I think you should
Hussein
run
type of tenure.
Dem
for
Lab for
30
a while.
years?
No, I don't think so. I think I'll do it another year and then you should take over. It'll have a whole different flavor and it'll be great.
All right. That's wonderful.
Starting in fall 2024, there will be an upper level residential democracy lab that Professor Nunez is going to run.
That's excellent. And before we break, I just wanted to ask you one last question. If if one has $1 million, okay, maybe that's not, maybe let's say $10.
$10.
And they wanted to sort of, bet on the elections this year. And I know that you work on the elections. I've interviewed you before on the question of elections, and my disclaimer is like I'm personally not personally right. I mean, this is disclaimer. I'm not excited about our choices.
A lot of people aren't. Both candidates have very high disapproval ratings.
I mean, it's really odd given the remarkable brains that we have in this country.
And we haven't had an election where you essentially have two incumbents running against each other in more than 100 years. So,
of course, there's all the other stuff about, other dimensions like always male and always
right.
I mean, but regardless of all of this, just for the sake of, since you work on similar or connected topics, do we have any kind of like inkling that?
Okay, so there are 3 indicators of presidential elections that tend to be predictive. The first indicator is the state of the economy. When around the middle of the year, if you look at the change in GDP, midsummer-ish, if it's positive, the party who is in power tends to win elections. And if it's negative, the economy is going down, then the party in power tends to lose elections. That's indicator number 1. So far, it appears that indicator is probably working in Biden's favor this year. Indicator number 2 is how long the current office holder has been in office. So usually when you have a president who is in their first term and running for re-election, they usually win. Now, Trump did that in 2020. He was a first-term president. He ran for re-election. He did not win. The last time that had happened was George H.W. Bush. And before that, it was Jimmy Carter. But really what you want to look at is how long has the party been in power in the White House. When Hillary Clinton ran in 2016, it was basically Democrats running for a third term, right? Because Obama had been in office 2008, 2012. Democrats were sort of running for a third term, so that was a huge disadvantage for Democrats that year. This year, Biden's in his first term. Democrats just took over the White House from the other party within the last term. And so this is also a factor that is in the Democrats' favor this year. The third fundamental that we look at is approval ratings. We say that, again, around the middle of the year, if the presidential or if the candidates' approval ratings are above 50%, sort of in the green range or whatever you want to call it, then that is an indicator that they might win re-election. So if you look at those 3 fundamentals, Democrats this year have probably an advantage, but maybe a weak advantage on the economy. There's, we still have to see how that falls out and how people feel about it. They have an advantage on the incumbent status, and they don't have an advantage on approvals, but neither does the other candidate. So not only do both the candidates have high disapproval ratings, but You and I are having this interview in March. The general election campaigns haven't really started yet. And it's not unusual for an incumbent president like Biden to have kind of meager approval ratings. And then as the campaign really gets going towards the summer and end of the summer, that they get a spike or a jump in their approval ratings. So whether or not that will happen to Biden or not, I don't know. A lot of things are going to happen between now and the end of the year. But if you only are looking at the fundamentals and I didn't say anything about specific candidates or the campaign or any of the contextual stuff that might matter in elections or policy or any of that stuff. But those three fundamentals historically are predictive. And, they on balance would point to a Democratic victory this year.
Well, just like a professor, you gave an answer that gave us actually knowledge and a mechanism, not just like a conjecture. So thank you so much. That's actually really interesting to
You're
just
very welcome.
funnel things down to, and I could cheat and say those things in
Absolutely
in conversations
for
at
your
dinner.
for your use, please.
Absolutely. Well, Jennifer, Professor Victor, this was really fun, and I hope that we can continue to have these conversations with you and other faculty members at Char who are doing really good things. And I know for a fact that a lot of students really love, you and your teaching and your work. And I personally appreciate all of the insights you've shared over the years. And, I don't know if people know, but I've interviewed you at least once maybe or twice in the past on a podcast, on the Char podcast, actually, and learned a lot. So thank you for being here, telling us a lot about this wonderful opportunity for students, and then about your research and how they're connected. And if there are any last words, the floor is yours.
I just want to thank you for inviting me. You're not just a cute interview host. You're sorry, I didn't like you have to call it the Title IX office now.
No, yeah. Hold on.
I know.
What's the number?
That's fair. I don't remember. But you are yourself an amazing and beloved professor.
Aww.
And out there doing all kinds of great work in the world for the academy and for the students and for the school. And this is just some, as far as I understand, unpaid volunteer work that you're doing with all of your amazing production talents. You are the jack of all trades.
Thank you. This is our school. So, and there are great things happening. So I'm just trying to feature some of it. So no, I appreciate that. And I hope that this encourages more and more people to come here, across the street actually, and just feature what they're doing and how they're like raising the status of our department and school.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, have a wonderful day, and thanks everybody for watching, and be safe.
Thank you.
I'm gonna keep this awkward moment.
That's cool. I'm gonna drink water now.
Yeah, I'm gonna drink water too. I'm gonna also drink from a bottle, and people are gonna hate me because.
Well, you got to do something to get the hate mail.
I mean, I'm just not there yet with the thing that my partner uses, and it just seems too cumbersome.
Does it?
Yeah. But I really should. I'm gonna. November is my deadline.
Plastic is killing the planet, right?
I'm saying November is my deadline.
I see.
I'm trying to.
What is it about November?
I always say November because I feel that right before Thanksgiving is a good time.
So you try to redeem yourself in the world.
Yeah, because
in the eyes of nature.
I end up eating a lot during Thanksgiving. It kind of like makes me feel okay. I give up something, but then I have a week of gluttony.
Sure, why not?
All right. Well, thank you very much, Jennifer. I don't know if we're going to keep this. I'll probably keep it.